The Battle of Chippawa, July the 5th, 1814. On July the 5th, 1814, a British force under Major-General Phineas Riall confronted an invading American army under Major-General Jacob Brown near the Chippewa River, today's Welland River, on the Canadian side of the Niagara River. This is what happened. On July the 3rd, 3,500 American troops crossed the Niagara River into Canada and quickly captured Fort Erie, which was defended by only 140 men from the 8th Regiment under Major Thomas Buck. On July the 4th, the 4th of July, an American brigade under Brigadier General Winfield Scott proceeded north along the Niagara River, only to be harassed and stonewalled all the way to the Chippewa by a small number of native warriors, plus the flank companies of the 100th Regiment, under the overall command of the aggressive Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Pearson. When Scott's men arrived at the Chippewa, they found the bridge had been damaged, the air full of smoke from burning buildings, and with British artillery pointed at them, the Americans called it a day, and were joined overnight by the rest of Brown's army. On the morning of July 5th, the opposing armies were encamped on both sides of the Chippewa River, separated by a wide plain with the Niagara River on the eastern flank and thick woods to the west. The British, under General Riall, had 1,800 men, while the Americans had at least 1,500 more. Action begins around 3:30 p.m. when General Brown sent a small force of militia and native allies under Brigadier General Peter B. Porter through the woods to drive off enemy snipers, which they do, only to emerge to a massive discharge of British musketry. British musketry. The British are coming! The British are coming! In the words of author D.R. Westhouse, quote, Riall, attempting to attack Brown, had sent a number of troops forward on his right to occupy the American left in a flanking movement designed to draw attention from his main assault. Riall hoped to catch the Americans unaware and in their camp, but Porter discovered his advance when he stumbled onto the main line as it was assembling for the assault. End of quote. Alerted, General Brown ordered General Scott to prepare his men, who had been preparing to drill, to prepare for battle instead. Moving onto the plain, and in spite of casualties inflicted by the British artillery, the Americans form up with the 25th Infantry Regiment over by the woods, the 11th Regiment in the center, and the 9th and 22nd Regiments on the right, while Captain Nathan Townsend, Towson, set up his battery on the road by the Niagara River. The arrival of the Americans would give birth to an urban legend. Why, these are regulars! As part of his efforts to turn his troops into professional soldiers, Scott insisted they be provided with proper uniforms, only to receive a large number of single-breasted gray jackets instead of the standard blue coatee. That's a coatee, C-O-A-T-E-E. So when General Riall first observed the gray-clad Americans, he assumed they were militia that could be easily driven off. But when they stood and fought, he supposedly said, Why, these are regulars! The British had formed into line with the 1st Royal Scots on the right, the 100th Regiment on the left, with the 8th King's Own Regiment held in reserve. The opposing lines then moved to within 100 yards of each other, and around 4:15 p.m. the fight was on. Captain Towson's Riverside Battery fought a duel with the British artillery before concentrating on the Redcoats with devastating effect. As well, rapid and accurate fire by the American infantry also took its toll and left Riall with no choice but to withdraw, the British troops retreating in good order, eventually heading to Fort George, Fort Mississauga, and to 20 Mile Creek. The butcher's bill for this intense 1-hour battle? The British lose 148 dead, 321 wounded, and 46 missing in action, some of whom were wounded left on the battlefield. But the Americans were not unscathed, with 58 killed, 241 wounded, and 19 missing. The Battle of Chippawa marked the first time American regulars defeated British regulars during the War of 1812, a victory which has produced yet another urban legend, that the gray uniforms worn by the cadets at West Point are based on the gray uniforms worn by the Americans at Chippewa. For the truth of the matter, see Redcoats and Gray Jackets by Donald E. Graves. This has been a very truncated account of the Battle of Chippawa, based on the account found in my go-to guide, D.R. Westhouse's unpublished The War of 1812, a chronology of the military actions 1812 to 1815, and I hope you found it more enlightening than confusing. As usual, all errors are strictly my own. For a more detailed understanding of the battle, I highly recommend Redcoats and Gray Jackets by Canadian historian Donald E. Graves, and the account of the battle in Richard Feldhau's The Tide of War, the 1814 invasions of Upper Canada. The thing I like about all of Feldhau's books are the excellent maps which allow you to follow the action, and his inclusion of detailed order of battle and casualty figures for both sides. The battle is also discussed in John Norton's autobiography, a Mohawk memoir from the War of 1812, as Norton was an active participant in the engagement. As well, I put links to a number of interesting videos about the battle in the description. If this is your first visit to 1812 channel, my name is Warren and I'm your host. I'm not a historian, nor am I an expert on the War of 1812. Instead, I'm a student wishing to learn about the conflict. Each month for the roughly 3 years of the war, I will outline the major events. I will also review a book on the war. Maybe. Just maybe. Did I miss anything? Any errors? Then let me know in the comments below. When the barrage lifts, cheers!